The story of the Codex of Ur begins not with discovery, but with silence. Unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Rosetta Stone, it has never been displayed in a museum, never celebrated in academic halls, and never officially acknowledged. It exists only in fragments of rumor, in forgotten footnotes of 19th century expedition logs, and in whispers passed among fringe historians. The Codex, they say, predates even Sumerian cuneiform. If true, it would represent the oldest written account of humanity, and possibly the most dangerous. If you like this video, kindly give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. When the first Western expeditions set foot in Mesopotamia during the colonial rush for antiquities, they uncovered treasures that rewrote history. Royal tombs of yore, clay tablets inscribed with laws and hymns, seals bearing the earliest known names of kings. Yet buried among the official reports are obscure mentions of tablets unlike any others. Fragments of a writing system that did not match Sumerian or Akkadian. Not etched in the familiar wedge-shaped cuneiform, but in symbols older, more abstract, as if belonging to a forgotten tongue. Within a few years, those mentions disappeared, the fragments vanishing into private collections or archives without further trace. It is here that the legend of the Codex of Ur begins. Researchers who stumbled across brief references to it in field notes or unpublished journals found themselves chasing shadows. A German archaeologist in the 1920s described stone tablets of unusual script unearthed near the foundations of Ur's ziggurat, only to later retract his statement. A British explorer in Baghdad claimed to have seen a sealed chest of inscriptions, guarded under orders of the crown, before his notes were confiscated and never returned. Each sighting is faint, unconfirmed, yet together they form a pattern. Something was found. Something that did not fit the narrative of human history. Something swiftly erased. The Codex was said to contain not merely lists or hymns, but a chronicle, a structured text, a book in the ancient sense. Its content, according to whispers and rare archival margins, was staggering. It described humanity not as children of chance, but as creations of deliberate design. It recorded cycles of catastrophe, ancient floods, and even celestial alignments far beyond the knowledge of early Mesopotamian skywatchers. Most troubling of all, it appeared to predict events far into the future. For institutions invested in maintaining a stable version of human history, such a text would be catastrophic. In the academic world, silence is often more telling than denial. The Codex is not dismissed as myth in scholarly circles. It is simply never mentioned. No mainstream textbook acknowledges it. No conference debates it. The absence itself suggests suppression. If fragments did exist, they are now either in private hands, sold quietly through the shadow markets of antiquities, or locked deep within institutional vaults where public eyes cannot reach. Conspiracy researchers argue that the erasure was deliberate. The timing is suspicious. Many Mesopotamian expeditions during the 19th and early 20th centuries were funded not by academics alone, but by empires, churches, and powerful families. When artifacts were shipped to London, Paris, Berlin, or the Vatican, selections were made. Some treasures displayed, others archived, and a few sealed away entirely. The Codex of Ur, if it truly surfaced, fell into the last category. Not destroyed, but hidden, its existence acknowledged only in the briefest of slips before vanishing from public record. Why would a text be considered so dangerous? Myths of ancient gods, cosmic cycles, and lost ages are plentiful across cultures, yet none have been so thoroughly buried. The answer lies in what the Codex represented. Unlike oral myths or allegorical scriptures, this was written testimony, carved in stone, predating Sumerian civilization itself. If authentic, it would suggest that our story did not begin with the Sumerians or Egyptians, but with something older, something intentionally forgotten. And if it contained knowledge of astronomy or prophecy verified by later discoveries, then the implications would be impossible to ignore. Those who chase the Codex today find themselves moving in circles of speculation. References appear in obscure bibliographies, in handwritten notes tucked into archival boxes, in whispers exchanged between collectors at private gatherings. A handful of alleged photographs circulate on fringe forums, eroded tablets with symbols that look almost mathematical, grids and spirals rather than words. Whether authentic or fabricated, they feed the fire of curiosity. The idea persists because it explains too much, and because its absence feels intentional. Every great civilization leaves behind monuments to its knowledge. Egypt had hieroglyphs. The Maya had codices. The Chinese had oracle bones. To believe that Mesopotamia, the so-called cradle of civilization, arose fully formed without a precursor is a stretch. The Codex of Ur, if real, would be that missing link, the book of origins predating the first cities, the memory of a lost age captured before being deliberately erased. Its very obscurity is its power. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Enoch, even the Nag Hammadi texts, all were suppressed at different points in history, yet they eventually surfaced. The Codex of Ur remains different because it does not exist in the public imagination. No tourist asks to see it in a museum. No school teaches its fragments. It is a ghost story within archaeology, kept alive only by those who refuse to accept silence as coincidence. The whisper of the Codex of Ur is more than a legend. It is a reminder that history is written not only by those who win wars, but by those who decide what truths are safe for humanity to know. Somewhere, in a locked vault or a forgotten chest, the Codex may still exist. A book that never officially was, yet may hold the most profound secret of all, that the origins of humankind were recorded once, long ago, and then deliberately erased from memory. Ur has long been celebrated as the jewel of Mesopotamia, one of humanity's first great cities, a place where civilization itself seemed to take its first steps. Rising from the dusty plains near the Euphrates, its ziggurat towers once touched the skies, a monumental staircase between earth and the divine. Within its walls, kings reigned, merchants traded, and scribes carved the earliest known laws and hymns into clay. For centuries, it has been revered as the birthplace of written history. Yet beneath this narrative of beginnings lies something far stranger. The possibility that Ur was not the start of civilization, but a continuation of something older, a palimpsest city layered upon forgotten worlds. The story of Ur begins in ruins uncovered during the early 20th century by Sir Leonard Woolley. His excavations revealed royal tombs filled with treasures beyond imagination, golden lyres, intricate jewelry, and sacrificial victims who had followed their rulers into death. These discoveries stunned the world, cementing Ur's place as the cradle of kingship, ritual, and written memory. But Woolley also uncovered anomalies he could not explain. Beneath the layers of the city, he found traces of a flood so immense that it seemed to confirm the Mesopotamian flood legends, echoing the story of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. This flood layer separated the known Sumerian world from something that came before, a shadowed civilization washed away, leaving only hints behind. Archaeologists concluded that Ur represented the dawn, the earliest coherent record of organized life. Yet certain fragments disturb that neat picture. Reports mention shards of tablets with markings unlike Sumerian cuneiform. These were dismissed as scratches, symbols without meaning. A few researchers suggested they represented a protoscript, something older than the first official writing. The suggestion was quietly set aside, overshadowed by the glory of Sumerian kingship. In the grand narrative of history, the story of humanity needed a clear beginning, and Ur was chosen to embody it. Anything older was folded into myth. The ziggurat of Ur still stands today, a reconstructed monument to human ambition, but it may be more than just a temple. Beneath its foundations, layers of older construction remain buried. Some believe Ur was deliberately built atop sacred ground that had already been significant for centuries, if not millennia. In Mesopotamian cosmology, cities were not arbitrary. They were constructed on sites believed to be cosmically aligned, tethering heaven and earth. If Ur's foundation predates the Sumerians, then the city may have been chosen to preserve an even older legacy, a site remembered through whispers, long after its original builders vanished. The royal tombs themselves raise unsettling questions. Within them were objects of extraordinary craftsmanship, some appearing out of place for their time. Tools of metallurgy that seemed advanced beyond what conventional history attributes to early Mesopotamia. Lyres decorated with bulls' heads and lapis lazuli imported from distant Afghanistan. Evidence of vast networks and knowledge already in place before civilization was said to have blossomed. To call Ur the beginning is to ignore the hints that a sophisticated world must have existed before it, one that left only traces, erased by time or catastrophe. There are scholars who quietly admit that the Sumerians themselves spoke of those who came before. Their king lists describe rulers reigning for impossible spans, thousands of years before the flood. Their myths speak of gifts of knowledge bestowed by beings who descended from the skies. To the Sumerians, their own civilization was not a beginning, but an inheritance. Ur, then, may not have been the birthplace of writing, kingship, and astronomy, but the place where these older traditions were gathered, preserved, and codified into the tablets we recognize today. Among fringe researchers, the whispers of the Codex of Ur are tied directly to this possibility. They suggest that fragments found in the earliest excavations did not match Sumerian script precisely because they belonged to a forgotten civilization buried beneath the city. If true, then Ur was chosen not to innovate, but to guard. The Codex, or what little survived of it, may have been among those relics, its symbols so unfamiliar that they were hidden away rather than studied. The flood that Woolley uncovered marks a symbolic divide in history. Above it, we find the familiar story of kings and temples, of laws and trade. Below it, only traces, hints of something erased. That erasure is perhaps the most telling clue. Civilizations do not spring from nothing. Yet official history insists that Sumer was a sudden miracle. The possibility that it inherited its brilliance from a forgotten predecessor is a notion too disruptive to the established order. The story of Ur as the cradle of civilization is clean, marketable, and comforting. The story of Ur as a palimpsest city built upon the bones of a vanished world is far more dangerous. The silence surrounding these anomalies is striking. In dusty excavation reports and overlooked museum notes, faint traces of something older remain. Tablets without context, artifacts with no clear origin, symbols that resist translation. To most, they are footnotes. To those who look closer, they are evidence of a chapter of humanity deliberately excluded from the narrative. Ur remains a monument to human ambition, but perhaps also a monument to memory, the memory of what came before. If the Codex of Ur truly existed, if it once surfaced among the fragments unearthed in these digs, then its suppression makes sense. To acknowledge it would be to admit that history does not begin with Sumer, but stretches back into a forgotten epoch, one whose knowledge could shatter the foundations of everything we believe about our origins. The cradle of civilization may not have been a beginning at all, but the echo of something much older, carefully buried beneath layers of time and silence. Ur, the city of kings, may have been built not to mark humanity's first steps, but to guard the remnants of a vanished world whose secrets were never meant to resurface. Among the countless mysteries of ancient Mesopotamia, none is more provocative than the notion of a hidden language, a tongue said to predate even the earliest Sumerian cuneiform. To scholars, writing begins with clay tablets marked with wedge-shaped impressions, a human invention born out of the need to track trade and record kingship. Yet scattered traces suggest otherwise fragments of symbols that do not fit neatly into the established timeline, marks that seem older, stranger, and infused with purpose. The legend of the Codex of Ur ties directly to this enigma. Whispered accounts claim the Codex was not written in the familiar cuneiform script, but in a proto-language, one so archaic that it defies all translation. This alleged first language carried not merely sounds or words, but layers of meaning, a symbolic system that conveyed concepts far beyond human speech. To those who believe in its existence, it was not a record of daily life, but a vessel of power, a text that resonated with the idea of a universal tongue, one capable of bridging the gulf between humanity and the divine. Myths across Mesopotamia echo with fragments of this belief. In Sumerian lore, the god Enki was the keeper of knowledge, a master of language and order. It was he who gifted humankind with understanding, allowing the chaos of existence to be shaped into law, ritual, and civilization. Enki's sacred speech was said to carry creative force, a vibration that could bring reality itself into alignment. To write in the language of the gods was not simply to record, but to command. Words, in this ancient worldview, were not symbols of thought, but tools of creation. This idea reverberates far beyond Mesopotamia. The biblical tale of Babel, where the tongues of men were divided, preserves a faint memory of a time when all humanity spoke as one. Ancient Jewish mysticism describes the language of heaven, a mode of communication used by angels and inscribed upon tablets of fire. In Egyptian tradition, Thoth, the god of wisdom, was said to write in a script that shaped the cosmos itself. Again and again, cultures separated by distance and time speak of an original language, older than speech, carrying with it the essence of divine knowledge. If the Codex of Ur truly existed, it may have been a relic of this primordial script. Some descriptions suggest that its symbols were not carved lines or wedges, but intricate patterns resembling constellations, spirals, and geometric forms. These patterns bear uncanny resemblance to later sacred diagrams, the mandalas of the East, the glyphs of Mesoamerica, even the abstract symbols carved into megaliths like Göbekli Tepe. Such connections hint at a global memory, a shared inheritance from a forgotten source. The Sumerians themselves hinted at this inheritance. Their myths describe the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the heavens to establish order on earth. They brought with them the Mi, sacred tablets of power that encoded not just laws, but sciences, arts, and the very structure of society. To many researchers, the Mi represents something more than myth, an ancient technology of knowledge, condensed into a form beyond our comprehension. The Codex of Ur, if it was part of this tradition, could have been one of these lost artifacts, a manual of the gods disguised as a book of stone. Mainstream archaeology avoids such interpretations, but anomalies remain. Certain tablets discovered in Mesopotamian digs bear strange inscriptions that appear non-Sumerian, predating the earliest known writing. They are usually dismissed as proto-writing, a primitive attempt that led to cuneiform. Yet to those who study the hidden narrative, they are fragments of the lost tongue, glimpses of a system that was not primitive at all, but far more advanced, a symbolic matrix meant to encode layers of meaning impossible in ordinary language. The very structure of language in Sumeria hints at something extraordinary. Unlike later alphabets, cuneiform could represent sound, idea, and symbol simultaneously. A single mark could mean a word, a number, a concept, or even a deity. It was multidimensional, more akin to programming than writing. If cuneiform itself was already this advanced, then what came before it must have been profound. The Codex of Ur may have been the prototype, the original source from which cuneiform inherited its layered nature. There are stories of fragments that surfaced briefly in private collections during the late 19th century, tablets whose inscriptions baffled translators. Some bore symbols resembling stars arranged in patterns. Others carried lines that appeared almost like circuit diagrams. These artifacts vanished into obscurity, either absorbed into institutional vaults or quietly acquired by collectors. The few descriptions that survive suggests that they did not fit comfortably into the Sumerian record, and so they were excised from history. If the Codex was a relic of the first language, its suppression becomes understandable. A text claiming to contain the words of the gods, the instructions of those who shaped mankind, would destabilize the entire narrative of human history. It would imply that civilization was not an independent achievement, but a guided inheritance, bestowed from outside. It would suggest that the myths of Enki, of Babel, of divine tablets of knowledge, were not metaphors, but veiled records of encounters humanity was never meant to remember. Language has always been power. Those who control the written word control law, memory, and identity. To unearth a text that predates all others would mean to confront truths carefully buried under millennia of accepted history. The Codex of Ur, written in the first language of the gods, was not a simple book. It was a key, a manual of creation, a testament to origins older than civilization itself. The most controversial whispers surrounding the Codex of Ur are not about forgotten empires or lost symbols, but about the very nature of humanity itself. According to fragments passed through obscure accounts, the Codex did not depict man as a random accident of evolution. Instead, it painted a far more unsettling picture: humanity as a designed species, engineered with intention, shaped by forces that walked the earth long before recorded history. Ancient Sumerian mythology offers eerie parallels to this claim. The cuneiform tablets that survived from Ur and other Mesopotamian sites speak repeatedly of the Anunnaki, beings described not as abstract deities, but as tangible presences, rulers from the heavens who established law, order, and knowledge among the first cities. Unlike the distant gods of later traditions, the Anunnaki were portrayed as administrators, overseers, and in some accounts, even genetic craftsmen. They are said to have shaped humanity to serve as workers, a species molded to carry out the heavy burdens of civilization. The Atrahasis epic, one of Mesopotamia's most significant surviving myths, records that mankind was fashioned from clay mixed with the blood of a god. This was not a metaphorical birth, but a technical act of creation. The Codex of Ur, if genuine, seems to have elaborated on this same unsettling theme, but in greater detail, describing the human form not as a miracle of chance, but as the product of deliberate design. In its lines were said to be diagrams resembling anatomical blueprints, accounts of life being measured and weighed, and references to cycles of correction, as if early versions of humankind had been adjusted, refined, or even replaced. Other cultures carry parallel echoes. In Egyptian lore, the god Khnum shaped men upon a potter's wheel. In Greek tradition, Prometheus molded the first humans from clay. In the Hebrew Bible, Adam was formed from dust, animated by divine breath. Across the world, the myth of humanity as an artifact, a created being, recurs with unnerving consistency. Yet the Codex of Ur allegedly presented this not as symbolic myth, but as historical record. If this text was indeed written in the proto-language, then its claim would not have been allegory. It would have represented the direct transmission of knowledge preserved from an earlier age, when the gods still walked openly among men. Those gods may not have been ethereal beings at all, but advanced entities, custodians of a technology so profound that shaping life was as simple to them as carving stone was to the Sumerians. Archaeological finds offer tantalizing hints that align with this vision. The sudden leap of humanity in Mesopotamia remains one of the great mysteries of prehistory. From scattered hunter-gatherers, civilization surged almost overnight. The invention of writing, mathematics, irrigation, law, and monumental architecture appeared in a span of centuries rather than millennia. It is as if knowledge was bestowed in complete form, not developed gradually. To mainstream history, this is simply the brilliance of human innovation. To the hidden narrative of the Codex, it was evidence of intervention, the deliberate shaping of a species to rise and serve. Even the human body itself, carries enigmas that some researchers have tied to this theory. The rapid expansion of the human brain, the peculiar fragility of our physical form compared to animals, and unexplained anomalies in genetic history have been cited as signs of manipulation. Some fringe geneticists argue that the sudden emergence of advanced language capacity paired with symbolic thought cannot be explained solely by natural evolution. To them, the Codex of Ur was not inventing a story, but preserving the memory of a transformation, an engineered leap that turned primitive hominids into the architects of civilization. Sumerian kingship myths reinforce this narrative. They describe rulers as descended from heaven, their right to govern written upon tablets of destiny. These kings were not portrayed as ordinary mortals, but as hybrids of divine and human bloodlines. If the Codex contained records of such lineages, it would explain why it was buried and erased. The notion of humanity's creators walking among men, shaping dynasties, and altering biology would destabilize not just religion, but the entire structure of authority. This forbidden knowledge would have been explosive. To acknowledge humanity as designed would have undermined the emerging theological narratives of later empires, narratives built on man as the chosen creation of a singular God. The Codex threatened to expose a different truth, that mankind's creators were not divine in the spiritual sense, but architects in a biological one, capable of altering flesh as easily as clay. Such a claim would have turned temples into laboratories and priests into gatekeepers of genetic secrets. The suppression of the Codex fits this pattern. Its contents were too dangerous, too destabilizing to the order of history. Myths could be tolerated, for they could be dismissed as allegory. But a text written in an archaic proto-language, describing diagrams, cycles of creation, and the deliberate crafting of humanity, could not. It had to vanish, absorbed into silence, its whispers preserved only in the faint echoes of mythology. The story of the Codex of Ur suggests that humanity's origin is not only a tale of survival and evolution, but a record of intervention. The oldest myths, stripped of metaphor, may not be stories at all, but coded memories of what was once known and later erased. Humanity may not have stumbled into civilization by chance, but was shaped, guided, and remade for purposes that remain hidden. The Codex of Ur, in this light, was more than a lost book. It was a mirror held to mankind, reflecting a truth both wondrous and terrifying. That we are not the children of nature alone, but the crafted heirs of powers whose motives have been buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. Among the most astonishing claims about the Codex of Ur is that it contained not only myths of gods and tales of creation, but something far more precise, detailed astronomical records. Within its forbidden lines, there were said to be star charts, descriptions of celestial cycles, and references to systems that modern science would not confirm until thousands of years later. If true, this would place the Codex in a league of its own, not as a mythological relic, but as a scientific manuscript centuries, even millennia, ahead of its time. Ancient civilizations certainly watched the skies, but what the Codex allegedly described went far beyond the observations of naked-eye astronomy. It spoke of stars invisible without advanced instruments, of orbits and cycles far too complex for simple stargazing, and of alignments tied to catastrophic events on Earth. Whispers of such records resonate eerily with other ancient mysteries. The Dogon tribe of Mali, for example, has long been a puzzle to ethnographers. Their oral traditions describe the star Sirius not as a single point of light, but as a binary system, Sirius A accompanied by a smaller, denser companion star. This companion, Sirius B, is invisible to the naked eye and was only confirmed by modern telescopes in the 19th century. Yet the Dogon described it with uncanny accuracy centuries earlier, even noting its orbital period. Scholars have debated whether this knowledge was passed through cultural contamination or independent observation, but the parallel to the Codex is striking. Babylonian astronomers, too, recorded sky maps that remain astonishing in their precision. Clay tablets depict planetary movements with mathematical calculations that seem beyond what was necessary for agriculture or ritual. They trace the cycles of Venus with incredible accuracy, cycles that repeat only after centuries of observation. If fragments of the Codex contain similar or even more advanced data, it would suggest access to a knowledge base beyond the reach of ordinary human observation. The Mayans, half a world away, add yet another dimension to this enigma. Their long count calendar tracked vast cycles of time, extending far beyond their immediate historical scope. The Mayans were obsessed with aligning human history to cosmic rhythms, mapping eclipses, solstices, and planetary conjunctions with breathtaking precision. Their calculations of the solar year were more accurate than the Julian calendar used in Europe thousands of years later. The Codex of Ur, if genuine, seems to have belonged to this same strange tradition, a weaving of human destiny with the mechanics of the stars. The alleged astronomical records within the Codex carried darker implications as well. They were said to connect cycles of destruction on Earth, floods, firestorms, collapses of civilization, to recurring alignments in the heavens. This echoes the teachings of nearly every ancient culture, that catastrophe is not random, but part of a cosmic rhythm. The Sumerians spoke of great floods sent when the gods grew weary of mankind. Hindu cosmology describes repeating cycles of creation and destruction, the yugas. Even the Aztecs recorded that previous worlds ended in elemental cataclysms: water, fire, and darkness. If the Codex tied these myths to precise astronomical cycles, then it was not just a storybook, but a warning system. Its charts may have linked star movements to disasters, suggesting that human fate was etched in the heavens themselves. This raises the unsettling possibility that the Codex's writers possessed observational tools or knowledge far beyond their time. To see Sirius B, to map planetary orbits, to track long precessional cycles of the Earth's wobble. These feats require either advanced instruments or inherited knowledge from a source outside recorded history. Perhaps it was preserved wisdom from a forgotten civilization, one that collapsed long before Sumer. Or perhaps it was given by those whom ancient texts called the gods, beings who looked to the stars not with wonder, but with familiarity. Modern archaeology often dismisses such claims as coincidence or exaggeration, yet the pattern is difficult to ignore. Across cultures, across continents, ancient peoples encoded knowledge of the cosmos that modern science only later rediscovered. Why were they so fixated on star systems invisible to the human eye? Why did they measure time in cycles lasting tens of thousands of years? And why, above all, did they link their survival to these celestial movements? The Codex of Ur seems to have been the most direct expression of this forbidden science. Not myth cloaked in allegory, but precise observation, as though written by astronomers who had peered into the infinite with tools we cannot imagine. That knowledge, if widely known, would have shattered the accepted narrative of human progress. It would prove that long before Galileo tilted his telescope toward the sky, humanity, or perhaps those who shaped humanity, already understood the stars. The disappearance of the Codex becomes more understandable in this light. Religious authorities and early chroniclers may have tolerated myth and fable, but records of star systems unknown to man would have been impossible to explain. Such a book could not simply be dismissed as superstition. It would have demanded answers, and in demanding them, it would have revealed truths that were never meant for the public eye. The astronomical records of the Codex, if they ever existed, remind us that history is not just the story of humanity, but of knowledge lost and knowledge erased. Somewhere in those vanished lines may have been the blueprint of the heavens as they were once understood, a cosmos alive with cycles, catastrophes, and perhaps even guidance from beyond. The Codex of Ur, in this chapter of its whispers, does not merely describe the stars. It binds the fate of mankind to them, suggesting that to know the heavens was to understand our destiny itself. The Codex of Ur, already steeped in mystery, takes its most unsettling turn when it leaves behind records of the past and ventures into prophecy. Within its forbidden passages, it is said to have spoken of cycles, ages of the world marked not by gradual change, but by catastrophic upheaval. Great floods, plagues that darkened entire nations, earthquakes that swallowed cities, and finally, a cataclysm by fire. To its hidden scribes, history was not a steady progression, but a wheel, turning endlessly between creation and destruction. The most prominent of these prophecies recalls a deluge so vast it reshaped the world. The Codex described waters rising beyond the reach of kings, sweeping away temples and palaces alike. This was no local flood, no seasonal overflow of rivers. It was an event that erased civilizations and forced survivors to begin again. The echoes of this vision can be found across nearly every ancient culture. The Sumerians spoke of the flood that ended the reign of antediluvian kings, preserved only because one man, Ziusudra, was warned by the gods to build a vessel. The Akkadian version named him Utnapishtim. In the Hebrew tradition, it became Noah. In India, Manu was guided by a mysterious being to survive the waters. Across the Americas, stories of floods stretch from the Aztecs to the Hopi. The consistency of the theme suggests not coincidence, but memory, a memory that the Codex of Ur may have deliberately preserved. But the Codex did not stop with water. It described plagues that spread like shadows, consuming crops, livestock, and human life. In some interpretations, these were not ordinary diseases, but breaths of the gods, a language that almost suggests chemical or biological origins. Entire populations were said to vanish in a span too swift for natural illness. Here again, parallels abound. Ancient Egypt recorded waves of pestilence that seemed to arrive with the Nile's cycles. The Hebrew Bible's plagues of Egypt paint a portrait of ecological collapse that reads as both divine punishment and natural catastrophe. The Codex framed these events not as isolated tragedies, but as part of a repeating pattern, punishments that arrived as the stars aligned in ominous configurations. Earthquakes and upheavals followed in the Codex's grim chronology. Cities collapsing into the earth, mountains belching fire, rivers of molten rock carving through once fertile lands. The idea of civilizations ending through sudden geological violence appears again and again in oral traditions. The Greeks spoke of Atlantis, swallowed by the sea after the earth quaked and fire burst forth. Indigenous South American traditions describe mountains erupting with fury, changing the very landscape in a single generation. The Codex placed these calamities within a framework of inevitability, as if humanity lived at the mercy of cycles far greater than itself. And then came the most terrifying prophecy of all, the end not by water, but by fire. The Codex of Ur allegedly warned of a future age when the heavens themselves would ignite. It spoke of a sky burning red and a storm of embers that would consume everything beneath it. This vision of fiery doom is one of humanity's most persistent apocalyptic motifs. The Zoroastrians foresaw a final purging of the world in molten flame, where rivers of fire would cleanse the earth. Norse myths described Ragnarok, when the sky would split and fire giants would sweep the land. Even Christian revelation ends with the world consumed in fire before a new heaven and earth arise. If the Codex of Ur tied these prophecies to astronomical cycles, then its warnings carry chilling weight. Comets, solar storms, or asteroid impacts could all manifest as fire from the heavens. Geological upheavals, too, often accompany celestial alignments, as gravitational forces subtly shift the Earth's balance. The Codex seemed to suggest that human destiny was never in human hands. It was bound to cosmic rhythms, to cycles of destruction that no king or empire could prevent. Such writings may explain why the Codex had to vanish. A text that calmly outlined the rise and fall of worlds, predicting that the present age too would end in catastrophe, would have been intolerable to rulers seeking order and control. To allow such prophecy to circulate freely would be to admit the fragility of every throne, the vulnerability of every civilization. Knowledge of astronomy was already seen as dangerous, for it gave the power to predict eclipses and seasons. But prophecy tied to cosmic destruction. That was knowledge that could unravel the very fabric of authority. The legacy of these warnings still lingers in humanity's collective memory. Our myths of floods, plagues, and fiery ends are not mere stories. They are fragments of something older, something once written down and then erased. The Codex of Ur did not simply chronicle the past. It whispered of the future, a future in which destruction is not a possibility, but a certainty, returning in cycles like the stars themselves. Whether written by human hands guided by long-forgotten science, or by beings whose knowledge spanned the cosmos, the Codex presented prophecy not as superstition, but as structure, a pattern to which mankind is bound. And it is this vision of inevitable catastrophe that may have made it the most dangerous book in history. By the late 19th century, Mesopotamia had become a treasure chest for European explorers and colonial archaeologists. Every spade of earth seemed to reveal relics of forgotten dynasties, cylinder seals, tablets etched with cuneiform, fragments of statues buried beneath sand for millennia. Yet among these discoveries, whispered accounts spoke of something unlike the rest, fragments of a manuscript not written in any known language. These shards, allegedly unearthed near the ruins of Ur and its surrounding settlements, were said to contain symbols both alien and deliberate, carved with a precision that puzzled even seasoned scholars. The fragments did not enter museums with fanfare, nor were they catalogued in the meticulous reports of archaeological expeditions. Instead, references appeared in the margins of field journals, in private letters between researchers, and in obscure papers that never reached mainstream publication. An assistant working under a British archaeologist described slates of curious inscription sent away for study, only for all mention of them to vanish soon after. A French scholar in Baghdad noted in his diary that certain crates sent to Paris contained materials of an unsettling nature. But when the crates arrived, they had been resealed and the contents appeared altered. It was as though the Codex of Ur had slipped into the shadows at the very moment it should have been revealed. Pieces of evidence suggest fragments may have entered private collections, purchased by wealthy antiquarians who preferred to keep their acquisitions secret rather than risk controversy. In other cases, rumors persist that institutions themselves deliberately buried the findings. The British Museum, whose vaults already contain thousands of artifacts hidden from public view, is often cited as a possible custodian of the missing codex. The Louvre, too, has been accused of holding back items deemed unfit for display. But if the codex was truly among them, no record survives to confirm it. The silence became louder as time went on. Official excavation reports from Mesopotamian sites, once filled with exhaustive detail, began omitting entire sections of recovered material. Researchers who mentioned strange fragments in personal writings never returned to the subject in published work. In some cases, they abruptly changed careers or withdrew from academia altogether. The pattern gives the impression of deliberate suppression, a tightening of control over what could and could not be said about the ancient world. Religious institutions, too, are suspected of playing a role in the disappearance. A manuscript that suggested humanity was designed, that prophesied cycles of destruction, and that spoke of gods walking among men, would have posed a direct challenge to established doctrine. For centuries, the Church had suppressed texts deemed heretical, hiding them in sealed archives or burning them outright. Could the Codex of Ur have been treated the same way? Certain hints suggest so. A Vatican archivist, writing in the early 20th century, spoke of Eastern writings of grave consequence received under confidential circumstances. What those writings were, he did not say. The timing, however, aligns with the last confirmed sightings of the Codex fragments. Governments may also have found reason to erase the Codex from history. By the 20th century, the modern nation-states of the Middle East were forming, and control over antiquities became a matter not only of heritage, but of politics. A text that questioned humanity's origins or hinted at catastrophic cycles might have been seen as destabilizing, too dangerous to circulate in a region already caught between colonial powers, rising nationalism, and religious influence. Locking it away, or ensuring it quietly disappeared, would have been the most pragmatic course of action. Yet fragments of knowledge are difficult to erase completely. Whispers continued, often for researchers working on the periphery of academia. In the 1960s, a German philologist claimed to have seen notes on the Codex written by an archaeologist, who had died decades earlier. In the 1980s, a collector in Switzerland allegedly displayed a tablet with markings that bore no resemblance to Sumerian or Akkadian writing, claiming it had come from the lost Book of Ur. None of these leads ever produced verifiable evidence. Still, they keep the legend alive, a reminder that suppression does not always mean total annihilation. The very pattern of disappearance strengthens the suspicion of a cover-up. If the Codex had simply been a forgery or a misinterpretation, it would have been dismissed publicly and forgotten. Instead, its traces were erased with precision, as though someone or several someones actively worked to remove it from the historical record. Its absence is conspicuous, a silence that draws more attention than denial ever could. Today, the Codex of Ur exists only as a ghost in the margins of history. It is not catalogued, it is not displayed, and it is not acknowledged by the very institutions that may still possess it. What remains are fragments of rumor, scraps of testimony, and the sense that a chapter of human history has been deliberately hidden from view. The reasons may be many: to preserve faith, to maintain political order, to protect humanity from knowledge deemed too dangerous. But whatever the motive, the disappearance of the Codex ensures one thing: the story of humanity remains incomplete. And perhaps that was the intention all along. For centuries, the Vatican has stood as both a spiritual beacon and a fortress of secrets. Behind its towering walls lies the Apostolic Archive, a labyrinth of manuscripts, scrolls, and documents so vast it is said to stretch over 80 kilometers in shelving. Access is limited to a handful of trusted scholars, and even then, only to specific documents chosen by the Church. Entire categories of history remain locked away, inaccessible to the outside world. Among the whispers that surround this archive is the suggestion that fragments of the Codex of Ur may have found their way into these hidden chambers. The Vatican's role in safeguarding or suppressing controversial texts is not merely a rumor, but a documented reality. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish scripture that describes fallen angels and their forbidden knowledge, was actively excluded from the biblical canon and declared heretical for centuries. The Apocalypse of Peter, once widely read among early Christians, was buried by ecclesiastical decree, its vivid visions of the afterlife deemed too disturbing for the faithful. Even in modern times, the so-called Third Secret of Fatima, allegedly containing dire warnings of future cataclysms, was withheld from the public for decades. When finally released, many believe the version was incomplete, sanitized, or altered. It is within this context of selective revelation that the Vatican connection to the Codex gains weight. Records suggest that by the early 20th century, reports of mysterious tablets and manuscripts discovered in Mesopotamia abruptly ceased in the academic world. Yet within a few years, scattered references to Eastern materials of troubling implication appear in correspondences linked to Catholic institutions. A Vatican archivist, writing under anonymity, once admitted that writings concerning primordial men and heavenly visitations were among the sensitive acquisitions transferred to Rome. While no direct mention of the Codex was made, the description echoes too closely the themes surrounding it to dismiss as coincidence. The question is not whether the Vatican has hidden dangerous texts. History has already proven that it has, but rather how much more remains in its custody. beyond public reach. If the Codex truly described humanity as a designed species, mapped star systems unknown to its supposed era, and prophesied cycles of destruction, then its existence would strike at the foundations of both scientific orthodoxy and theological doctrine. For the Church, which has long balanced faith with authority, the safest course of action would have been silence. Patterns in suppression suggest intent rather than accident. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the mid-20th century, were also restricted for decades, accessible only to a select circle of scholars closely tied to ecclesiastical institutions. Some documents were published only after immense public pressure, and even then, portions were missing. When fragments appeared that described celestial beings imparting knowledge to humans, parallels with the Codex's rumored content became impossible to ignore. It is as if these ancient writings, scattered across different lands and eras, carried a single thread. Humanity had contact with forces it was not meant to remember. The Vatican's control over such knowledge is not merely about theology. It is about narrative. The Codex, like the Book of Enoch or the Fatima Secrets, is more than challenge faith. It destabilizes the story humanity tells itself about its origins, its destiny, and its place in the cosmos. By burying these accounts, the Church does not erase them, but reshapes history, guiding collective memory in ways that preserve order. After all, to admit that our species might have been engineered, or that cycles of fire and flood are inevitable, would shatter both authority and certainty. Occasionally, cracks appear in this wall of silence. Scholars who have worked in the archives report sections sealed for centuries, untouched even by curators. Others speak of lists cataloging prohibited manuscripts never shown to the public. In 2012, a researcher claimed that during his brief time inside the Apostolic Archive, he encountered descriptions of artifacts from Mesopotamia that had never been published elsewhere. He was not allowed to view them directly, and when he pressed for access, his request was permanently denied. If the Codex is indeed in Vatican custody, then it joins a long lineage of texts deliberately concealed because they reveal too much. The Church has always presented its role as one of protection, shielding the faithful from heresy or humanity from knowledge it is not ready to bear. But protection is indistinguishable from control, and silence as a way of deepening the mystery rather than ending it. The Vatican connection is not simply a matter of hidden manuscripts. It is a reminder that our understanding of history depends on what we are allowed to see. The Codex of Ur may lie in some guarded chamber, classified alongside the most dangerous and disruptive writings of antiquity. If so, then the greatest secret of all is not that the Codex was lost, but that it was found and then locked away, in the one place where truth is often indistinguishable from doctrine. Even without the physical pages of the Codex, its voice seems to ripple across cultures and eras, echoing through the myths and legends of civilizations separated by oceans and millennia. It is as though fragments of its message were scattered like seeds, hidden within the stories we call folklore, preserved by memory when ink and parchment could no longer endure. Across Mesopotamia, one of the oldest stories humanity ever told speaks of gods who descended from the heavens to shape mankind. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki, beings who bestowed knowledge upon humans, yet demanded servitude in return. Humanity, according to these myths, was not a free creation, but a workforce crafted for higher powers. When compared with the Codex's rumored claim that humans were a designed species, the parallel is impossible to ignore. Far away in Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Maya, describes multiple creations and destructions of mankind. Each cycle ended in failure until the current human race was finally formed from maize. Yet the gods, in this account, also feared that humans might grow too aware, too powerful. So knowledge was rationed, given in fragments, and priests became guardians of the sacred truths. This theme, forbidden knowledge guarded by intermediaries, aligns with what the Codex allegedly contained: truths too dangerous to be revealed in full. In Greece, the myth of Prometheus tells of fire stolen from the gods and given to humanity. Fire here is more than flame. It is a symbol of knowledge, technology, and awakening. For this act of defiance, Prometheus was bound and punished for eternity. The underlying message is clear. Enlightenment comes at a cost, and the divine order resists it. The Codex, if it truly contained advanced knowledge of the stars, of creation, of prophecy, would have carried the same weight, the same forbidden spark. The flood myths are perhaps the most striking echo. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical tale of Noah, from Hindu traditions of Manu to Native American legends, cultures across the globe preserve a memory of a world consumed by water. Entire civilizations washed away, with only a chosen few carrying the seed of survival forward. The Codex's prophecy of recurring cycles of destruction, including floods and fire, seems to mirror these collective memories. Were these simply cautionary tales, or remnants of a shared history encoded in myth? Even the idea of celestial knowledge, maps of the stars and secrets of the cosmos, surfaces in surprising places. The Dogon people of Mali, long before modern astronomy, spoke of Sirius and its invisible companion star, Sirius B, a detail only confirmed by telescopes in the 20th century. The Mayan calendar, with its astonishing precision, aligned earthly time with cosmic cycles in ways that modern science is still unraveling. Babylonian sky charts, older still, traced constellations with uncanny accuracy. If the Codex contains similar astronomical records, then it may not have been unique, but part of a wider, older tradition of cosmic awareness scattered across cultures. The patterns are too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Gods descending from the heavens. Humans molded or remade across ages. Knowledge restricted, hidden, or stolen. Catastrophes sweeping the earth in cycles. These motifs are not the invention of a single people, but a chorus, sung in different tongues, repeating across continents. What if these echoes are not independent myths, but fragments of a single, ancient source, the same wisdom preserved in the Codex of Ur, diffused into story after story when the original text vanished from sight? This possibility reframes mythology itself. Instead of fantasy or allegory, myths become encrypted history, veiled accounts of encounters, disasters, and revelations too vast to be recorded plainly. Priests, shamans, and chroniclers may have wrapped them in symbolism not to deceive, but to protect. To pass on truths that could not be spoken directly, truths that survived in metaphor when they could not survive in writing. If so, the Codex may not truly be lost. Its essence may endure in the stories told by firelight, in the chants of temples, in the sacred texts declared apocryphal or heretical. It is as if the knowledge itself refuses to disappear, resurfacing again and again, demanding to be remembered. Perhaps this persistence is why suppression has never fully succeeded. You can lock away a manuscript. You can hide a scroll in an archive. But myths have wings, and ideas cannot be buried forever. The echoes of the Codex remind us that human memory is deeper than paper and ink. Beneath the myths we dismiss as legends may lie the remnants of a history far older, far stranger, and far more unsettling than we are allowed to believe. If the Codex of Ur truly existed, its prophecies were not vague allegories, but a structured warning. Its fragments, as whispered by those who claim to have glimpsed them, mapped a repeating cycle. Humanity rises, flourishes, forgets, and falls. Floods, plagues, famines, and wars marked earlier turns of this wheel. The pattern was clear, and each calamity was not an isolated event, but part of a rhythm, a cosmic clock striking at appointed intervals. Look around at our world today, and it is difficult not to sense the echoes. Global floods now dominate headlines as glaciers melt and oceans rise. Ancient cities, once thought forever buried, are emerging again from beneath receding waters, as if history itself is resurfacing to remind us. Pandemics have swept across continents, testing not only human health, but the resilience of societies. Just as the Codex described, plagues thinning populations and reshaping civilizations. Even the wars of our era, fought not just with weapons, but with information, technology, and the threat of annihilation, seem to mirror the warnings of catastrophic conflict embedded in ancient prophecy. But within the Codex, according to legend, these were not the final chapters. Beyond the waters, beyond the pestilence, beyond the hunger and strife, lay the last cataclysm, the fire. This was not fire as metaphor, not the gentle, purifying flame of ritual, but a consuming inferno. Entire landscapes transformed, the very air itself unbreathable. Civilizations scorched from existence in a conflagration so vast that survivors, if any remained, would speak of it as the end of all things. What kind of fire did the Codex describe? Some say it was cosmic in scale, an asteroid, a solar flare, or a celestial alignment unleashing devastation upon the earth. Others whisper it was man-made, a war born of hubris, of technologies wielded without wisdom, of weapons that could set the sky alight and reduce cities to shadows etched in stone. There are even those who insist the Codex spoke of both, an external fire coinciding with humanity's own reckless hand, as if fate and folly were destined to converge. The chilling detail lies in timing. The Codex, it is said, did not predict single dates, but cycles, patterns that recur every few thousand years. And according to some interpreters, we are not at the beginning of the cycle. We are nearing its end. The floods have already come, the plagues have already struck, and the wars have already begun to reshape the world order. What remains is the fire, the last prophecy waiting for its curtain to rise. If this is true, then the greatest question is not whether the Codex existed, but why it was silenced. Perhaps it was locked away in Vatican vaults, buried in private collections, or erased from public memory, not simply to suppress inconvenient history, but to prevent panic about what lies ahead. After all, what would it mean if the world knew it was living on borrowed time, that its fate was already inscribed in a vanished book no one was meant to read? Yet secrets have a way of leaking through the cracks. Whispers persist of sealed manuscripts in forgotten monasteries, of fragments surfacing briefly before being spirited into obscurity, of researchers silenced or discredited after they spoke too freely. The story of the Codex seems less like the tale of a lost relic and more like an ongoing struggle between knowledge that demands to be known and powers determined to keep it hidden. And so we return to the fire. If the Codex is real, then somewhere in those missing pages lies a description of what form it will take. Was it a comet streaking across the heavens? The sun itself lashing out with a storm, capable of crippling modern civilization? Or was it the fire we kindle with our own hands, the fire of weapons, of greed, of progress untamed? Each possibility feels both distant and terrifyingly near, a reminder that humanity's greatest strength has always walked hand in hand with its greatest vulnerability. The very obscurity of the Codex may be its greatest revelation. Why would governments, institutions, or religious authorities labor to bury a text, unless it contained something that could shake the foundations of belief, order, and power? Why would a book vanish into silence unless its words had the power to ignite fear, or worse, to awaken? Perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this: the Codex may not be finished. What if its final pages, the ones that speak of the fire, were never truly written, but left blank as a warning? A silent message, a mirror held up to humanity, forcing us to recognize that the last prophecy is not a fixed fate, but a choice. That whether the fire comes from the stars or from ourselves depends on how we act in the time that remains. And yet, history suggests otherwise. Civilizations before us, with their myths of floods and flames, their stories of gods withdrawing knowledge, their warnings carved in stone, all seem to whisper the same message. We are not the first, and we may not be the last. If the Codex is real, then its cycle will not end with us, unless we finally break it. For now, its last secret remains hidden. In sealed vaults, in suppressed archives, in the fragments that occasionally flicker into view, only to vanish again. But the fire it foretold does not wait for permission. Whether cosmic or human-made, it may already be on its way. So the Codex leaves us with a haunting legacy. Floods remembered, plagues endured, wars ongoing, and a fire yet to come. Somewhere in that vanished text, in the book humanity was never meant to read, lies a future written in silence, waiting for the moment it will be revealed.